Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chester, the heart of the Northwest. Tonight's meeting is sponsored by the EFDD group. It stands for Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy. There are 45 members of the EFDD group from 7 countries. The biggest delegation within that EFDD group are the 22 UKIP MEPs. The co-presidents of the group are David Borrelli from the Five Star Movement in Italy and our own Nigel Farage. And being a member of this group allows Nigel to stand up on the front row of the European Parliament and berate Europe's great and wise, that was sarcastic, politicians. Speaking tonight alongside Nigel are our 2 Northwest MEPs, Louise Bours and Stephen Wolfe. And I don't think anyone can deny that we have a great team up here in the Northwest, and you're well served by your MEPs who are regulars on radio and TV and do the cause very proud indeed. Now, what we're here to discuss is our membership of the European Union. Let's not forget, it's been 40 years since we last had a referendum on our membership, and back then it was the European Economic Community. And back in '75, we were told it was about trade, and those on the no side, those who wanted to leave the European Economic Community, spoke about a pooling of sovereignty and a pooling of democracy, and they were cast aside as being conspiracy theorists. Well, they were proven right, because what people didn't vote in '75 for was a flag, an anthem, a currency, the fact that you now have a European Commission that meets in secret and makes over 70% of the laws of this country. And indeed, what happened after that referendum? You had the Single European Act, which pretty much created the single market. You had the Maastricht Treaty, you had the Amsterdam Treaty, the Nice Treaty, the failed European Constitution, and then, of course, the Lisbon Treaty. So those who wanted to leave in '75 and were described as conspiracy theorists were actually right. You were hoodwinked in 1975. We now have the opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity, to right that wrong. Now, the first speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is a Northwest MEP. She's from Cheshire herself. She was elected in 2014 in those European elections when we became the first political party since 1906 to win a national election that wasn't the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. A great achievement indeed. She's a regular on television, has been on Question Time 3 times in the past year. I think the most memorable time was when she literally 2-footed Joey Barton, that useless footballer, by telling him that his brains were in his boots. She's here tonight to talk about the dangers that the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, better known as TTIP, and the dangers to our NHS. Ladies and gentlemen, Louise Bours, MEP.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. It's lovely to see so many of you here. As a member of the EFDD group, we regularly see reports and initiatives which do nothing but increase the bureaucratic burden upon member states. Now, as my party's health spokesman, this evening I'm going to focus on those that have a direct effect on our NHS. Now, there are many areas and aspects of the NHS that are affected by our full membership of the European Union. There are reams of rules, regulations, directives that defy logic and leave clinicians and managers in a headspin. and the pending TTIP trade deal, of which I'll speak about later, threatens the very fabric and principles that the NHS was built upon. As we've said, there are many specific regulations and initiatives that threaten the structure and efficacy of our NHS, and I've nowhere near enough time this evening to cover them all. But I'm just going to mention a couple before going on to talk about the TTIP agreement. Now, from next year, medical researchers will be blocked from using historical patient data records for research purposes. Now, Cancer Research UK have been particularly vocal in their opposition to this new regulation, claiming that lives will be lost. It's vital for those looking for new cures and treatments to be able to track the medical history and developments within patients, and this regulation is going to put a stop to that. The testing of new medicines has also taken a shocking turn under the European Union. Tonight, I have to tell you about the EU's Medicine for Children regulation. It prohibits medical trials being carried out on children. Now, the Institute of Cancer Research and other major cancer charities oppose the regulation, and health experts say it has already resulted in unnecessary child deaths across Europe, because half of all new drugs developed between 2007 and 2014 have not been tested on children, and therefore they cannot be licensed or prescribed to children. Giving terminally ill children access to new treatments and drugs is vital in the fight against childhood cancer. It is barbaric to deny them an opportunity to extend their lives, or maybe even the possibility to cure them, simply because of European Union regulation. Now, just before I go on to the biggest threat that I consider for our NHS, I want to dispel a quick myth about the EU. Many Europhiles say that without freedom and movement of people, our NHS would grind to a halt. Well, let me make this perfectly clear this evening. Despite the propaganda, controlling immigration will not damage the NHS. Whilst we have a system in this country where new nurses have to have a university degree, we will never be able to provide the numbers of nurses the NHS needs. We are simply not training enough. And it's not because there are too few people wanting to become nurses, it's because we refuse to accept that not all those entering the nursing profession need a university degree. So let us have a system where those that excel academically can achieve the degree they aspire to. That should be applauded. But let us also encourage and enthuse those who see nursing as a vocation. We want to see the return of the state-enrolled nurse. Now, all of the above that I've just spoken about are specific issues within the health service, how it delivers what we want it to deliver. But the biggest threat the EU poses to the NHS is TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that Brussels wants to sign with the USA. It will not only change how services are delivered, but it will go further. It will change why services are delivered. It would take us from a health service motivated by delivering the best for patients to a health service motivated by delivering the best private profit. We have the most established healthcare system in the world, nearly 70 years old. America doesn't have one at all. And the confusing Obamacare is barely 70 days old. We should not be allowing other EU nations the current power they do to influence our health services, let alone investors from a country where someone has to sell their house in order to get life-saving treatment. Now, the Tories want to... the Tories tell us that there's no need to exempt the NHS from the TTIP because it's not at risk. Labour MPs say they want exemption, yet their own MEPs are helping to get the agreement through the committee stages. Now, TTIP will allow multinational companies to sue national governments if they introduce policies that may harm their investments. Now, doesn't that seem a bit topsy-turvy to you? I mean, shouldn't it be the other way round? Aren't corporations meant to serve us rather than us serve them? And surely a private company should be fitting into our rules, not us fitting into theirs. So if Labour are serious about protecting the NHS, they should stop their MEPs helping the agreement go through. And I would say to David Cameron, if he's so sure that TTIP won't involve the NHS and affect the NHS, then why not introduce legislation to protect it? The legislation won't be needed as far as he's concerned, but I tell you what, it is needed as far as we're concerned, because, Mr Cameron, the public don't trust you. And why? Well, let me share with you, ladies and gentlemen, a little-known line from the EU. I found it in the EU document library, and it's from June of this year, in a document specifically about TTIP. And it says, "The EU reserves the right to adopt or maintain any measure with regard to the provision of all education, health, or social services which receive public funding or state support in any form." Mr Cameron, how do you get out of that? I mean, if you want people to believe that the Conservatives care about the British people and the NHS, he must advocate leaving the EU. The UK needs to be able to control its own NHS, full stop. So I'm angry. I can get passionate. I'm angry on behalf of the elderly people who have paid in all of their lives only to see the EU decimate the care available to them. I'm angry for the seriously ill that will suffer longer because of EU restrictions on research. I'm angry and upset for the children whose lives will be blighted by the EU rules against medicine trials. And I'm angry for every bit of interference from the EU into our NHS. So between now and the referendum, my job is to make sure the public know the hugely damaging effect the EU is having on our NHS and therefore on our health, and the massive dangers it faces if we stay within the EU. I will do everything to ensure the public know that we have to leave the EU if we really believe in our NHS. I believe in the NHS. And I believe that an independent Britain is the only way to secure our health service for you, your children and your grandchildren. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.